Welcome to the Clean Library Podcast, where content meets conscience. We believe there are millions of you readers out there desperately searching for a better way to find clean content. Each episode, we will introduce you to a new author of clean books, giving you, your family, and your friends clean options.
Hello, everyone. My name is Marcus Williams, and I'm here with co-host Brock Morris and our special guest today, Ken Urbansky. After receiving the highest grade in his 8th grade creative writing class, he set writing aside for nearly 50 years in pursuit of other interests. His saxophone and involvement in the high school marching band were traded in for an electric guitar and rock and roll. The guitar surrendered to an M16 when he enlisted in the U.S. Army in 1968, and the M16 gave way to the Bible when his wife Randy and he committed himself to Jesus Christ while he served as a military policeman in Berchtesgaden, Germany. And I hope I pronounced that close to correct. After they returned home in 1971, they found that the traditional Protestant churches were unwelcoming to two converted hippies who believed first century Christianity could be restored in the present time. Undeterred, they planted their first church in 1972 in Avon Lake, Ohio, and spent the next 45 years in Christian ministry, where he served as pastor and worship leader. In 2012, he returned to writing and co-authored 2 books with Bob Mertes. Mertz? Did I say that right? Mertes. Great. Bob died of COVID-19 on November 20th, 2020. Unable to complete the series at that time, he turned his attention to his book, The Timeless Apostle. Welcome, Ken. Thank you so much for being on the show with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. All right. So as everyone knows, if you've listened before we get started, we have to introduce the 2 truths and a lie that you gave to us to try to figure out. So I'll remind everyone of the score, even though I wish I didn't have to. Steve here says Brock is ahead 8-5.
Steve is never wrong. And these are some doozies, so I'm excited to get into what these might be through our discussion today.
All right. So let me give them to you. Number 1. I once stood within a few feet of the United States president with a loaded .45 caliber handgun. Number 2, I had lunch with Mick Jagger and Keith Richards. Number 3, the commanding general of the Ghanaian Air Force took me and some friends out for a Coca-Cola in Accra, Ghana. All right, so next to the president, carrying a .45 caliber, lunch with Mick Jagger and Keith Richards, or going out with the general of the Ghanaian Air Force. Those are some interesting ones. We'll have to see if we can figure those out. All right. So you've written different types of books, and the one we want to talk about first, I think, is The Timeless Apostle. So why don't you tell us about kind of that break in your life and what got you back into writing after such an interesting career in ministry and in the Army and traveling the world?
Well, back in 2010, I reunited with a friend who lived in Clemens, North Carolina, where I live now. And that friend was Bob Mertes, and as my wife and I traveled down here to visit with them over the years, we just got to talking because we were both ministers of the gospel, and we would talk about various beliefs that we had and the types of interests in the Bible that we had. And some of those conversations got pretty interesting. And one day we were sharing some thoughts about the creation and whether or not that was restricted to the earth or the whole universe, and was there life on other planets and all that kind of stuff. And at some point I said to Bob, I think there's a book in there somewhere. And he said, well, then let's write it. And 10 years later, we finished the second of those 2 of that trilogy and self-published those. And then when he died, we were right in the middle of writing the 3rd chapter, or the 3rd book of the series. And once he was gone, I was not really able to get over that hump and finish the story.
Yeah.
And so my wife and I walk in the park across the street from our condo, and about 10 feet inside the confines of the park, and a beautiful place with trees and birds and wonderful nature. The story of the timeless apostle just popped into my head, and I came home and began to write. And it took me 2 years to finish the book, and here we are.
Cool. So we want to talk about that book for sure, but I'm interested in how did that collaboration work? Was it back and forth, like one chapter back and forth that you each wrote, or you talked about it and someone, like, how did that work?
Yeah, well, for the first 8 years, it was a little tough because we only got to work on it in person for a couple of weeks a year, because that we would come down here and visit with them, and we would work on it full time for a week, and then we would do it over the phone. I would write something, I'd call him up, I'd read it to him, he'd say, "That's great, let's go with this direction or that direction." We'd do it over the phone for the other 50 weeks out of the year, and then a couple of years ago we moved down here, and Bob and I were able to work on it full time for about a year and a half, and finish both books up really quickly. So it was just a matter of a kind of an off statement. Hey, I think there's a story there, and we decided we could write it. And actually, it came pretty quick.
That's cool. I think I know I would find that challenging collaborating like that. And so I think that's really cool that you guys were able to do that. And well, maybe it's the closeness of your friendship or just the idea itself.
Well, and we both have different gifts.
Uh-huh.
Bob is an idea guy. He's an artist.
Okay.
He sees things in beautiful ways, and I'm kind of the writer and the storyteller. And so
Gotcha.
we would just sit and he would bounce ideas off me. And once we discovered an idea that we thought would move the book along, then I would write it. He would go over it and edit it, and we would continue that process week after week. So we really, because we didn't do the same things, we weren't in real competition with each other. We were just doing what we each did well.
Cool. Able to find your strengths and allow the other
Yes.
person to, yeah,
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
great. You're able to do that and figure out a good way to work together like that. 'Cause I'm sure it was very fulfilling to work with such a good friend and creating something together.
Yeah, and it was especially nice when I would write. He would come up with the idea. I would write it, and he would go, "That's exactly what I was thinking. That's the way I would have written it if I could write." So,
Yeah.
so it worked out really well.
A great collaboration. So did you two end up then editing for each other too? Did you sort of edit it yourselves, or did you still bring other editing resources in while you
Get
wrote?
ourselves, and then when we got close to the end, we purchased a an editor from the Reedsy company, and
Hmm.
they did a real nice job of editing it, and then we self-published on Amazon.
Cool. Awesome. So this current book, your most recent book, The Timeless Apostle, is that also self-published or did you go traditional publishing on that one?
No, I actually found a publisher. Kind of an interesting story.
Yeah.
As as any author will tell you, there's 1,000 rejections before you come up with the one person that might find something in your story that they like. And this was true. We got so many rejections with the first set of books that we just stopped and self-published. And I had
Hmm.
gotten about 100 rejections on the Timeless Apostle. And then I came across a publisher from Sutton, Alpine, Alaska, who had a little questionnaire to fill out. And the interesting thing was the name of the company is the Relevant Publishers. And the last question on the questionnaire was, "What makes your book relevant?" And I was in a particularly bad mood that day, and I was thinking I should have quit trying to get a publisher long ago. Why put up with one more rejection? But I said, all right, I'll fill out the questionnaire. So I did it. And when I got to the question at the end, I said, there's nothing relevant about this. It's just a novel. It's just a story, you know, and it's not like this is a full-fledged Bible study or something of that nature. This is just a story. There's nothing relevant about it. It's just supposed to be fun. The publisher
Yeah.
called me that day and said, I think you're selling yourself short. I like the idea of the story. Send me the book. So I sent it to them. They signed me about a week later, and we went from there.
That's awesome. A little bit of honesty got you a long way on that one.
Really did.
So tell us what the story is about.
The story is about a 21st century young fella, dropped out of college, kind of went to college to escape his home life anyway, doesn't really have any idea what he wants to do with his life. And he's very estranged from his mom and dad because they're very devout Christian people.
Mm-hmm.
And he doesn't believe anything about the Bible or faith. And so when he kind of gets frustrated with college and drops out, he goes home one last time and discovers that that was not such a good idea because his dad and he still can't get along. And uh, finally, his dad busts into his room one morning. He's only been home a couple of days. He busts into the room on Sunday morning. He says, "Come on, son, time to go to church." And he said, "Dad, I'm not going to church. I don't believe that stuff. You know, I don't." And his dad's about to kind of pull him out of bed and say, "Let's go." And when his mom
Mm-hmm.
breaks into the conversation and says, "Tommy, please come to church." And the tone in her voice was just something that moved him. And he said, "Okay, Mom, I'll go." And so he goes to church. He hears a message from the pastor that morning about doubting Thomas and how so many people judge Thomas on the one mistake that he made. Uh, Nobody remembers him for the good things he did or for the courageous things he
Mm-hmm.
did. They remember him because he said, "I won't believe until I see it with my own eyes." And
Yeah.
so when Tommy gets back home and his dad have another big fight, he says, "I'm moving out." Uh, so he goes up to his room, goes to bed. In the morning, he wakes up and he's not in his bedroom anymore. He's on a chilly hillside in first century Galilee, and Jesus is walking by, and somebody's trying to wake him up. And Tommy says, "Jesus, what time is it?" And Jesus answers, and he says, "It's just before sunrise, and we have to go."
Awesome.
And so at that point, Jesus is on his way to preach the Sermon on the Mount. Uh, Andrew, one of Jesus' other disciples, reveals to him that they're all getting ready to go. He lets them all go ahead while he sits at the fire and tries to figure out what in the world has gone on. And there's really nothing he can do but conclude that he is, in fact, in first century Galilee, and he is occupying the body now of Thomas the Apostle. So the story, first half of the story, is how he just grapples with the reality that there he is. He watches Jesus, or he listens to Jesus preach the Sermon on the Mount. He sees the miracles, he sees the healings. And as time goes on, he begins to get curious. He begins to recognize that this all might be true. And one of the interesting things about
Mm-hmm.
midway through the book is that Thomas doesn't have anybody he can talk to. He can't talk to anybody about having come from the 21st century. He can't talk to them about his fears or his concerns. So I move his girlfriend from back home back to the 21st, or back to the first century as well. So now he has someone he can talk to, communicate with, and more of the inner part of the story can be revealed.
Yeah. That sounds very interesting. That's a great idea. Very creative. I love it. Um, it and I think that the experience Tommy had with his dad and getting that coming of age, questioning your parents' faith and your faith is a very relevant to use that word. I think that's relevant to a lot of people. A lot of young people go through that same process.
Yep, I did. My kids all did. So yeah, it's natural.
Yeah,
And
absolutely. So
how much doubting just plays a part in our experiences. I mean, just as you shared, you were doubting whether or not you should have filled out that
Mhm.
last application, or serve questionnaire, and we doubt all the time. And so to think of this concept of being taken to a place where we can address our doubts and search them out, right, and try to really sort out what's true for us and what's not, and when do you push forward even when you doubt, right? So yeah,
Right.
I love that story.
yeah, that's super cool. So it came out just recently, right? When it was released.
Yes. So
All
I
right. Well,
haven't
congrat.
first. my first report from the publisher to see how we're doing yet, but that will be coming sometime about the second week of June. So
Yeah. Very cool. So with this publisher, will they do an audiobook as well?
I think they will if we begin to have some success with the sale of the paperback. I'm sure we will. I've got a
Okay,
son
great.
that does
How about,
that has a. I might have him actually do the audio.
oh, that's cool. Has he done previous books, or he just has a great voice?
Well, he's done some work in auto recording studios.
In
So yes.
Okay, so he knows what he's doing. That'd be cool. That'd be really cool to
Yes.
be able to narrate your dad's book. I think that would be awesome. So with your experience in the military and living around the world, do you have any stories in you that you're planning to write regarding some of those experiences?
Um, Actually, there in the original series that Bob and I wrote together, there are a lot of
Okay.
experiences that that one of the primary protagonists in that series is, in fact, uh, a military policeman in Berchtesgaden, Germany, and that's where he encounters a celestial being who fills in the gaps for him, and he responds to the story, and he discovers that he has a mission to accomplish in relationship to a group of beings who were produced in Genesis chapter 6 called the Nephilim, which is
Mm-hmm.
uh, a race of giants who were the offspring of angels and human women. And their evil intent has been carried on through the centuries. And this character discovers that he is a part of this world of good and evil, and he's got some things to do to accomplish in order to prevent the Nephilim from once again having dominance over the earth. So, so yeah, my
Cool.
character in that
So,
the character in that book is very much me.
very much you, based on your experiences. So it's difficult, and you mentioned this a little bit in your initial application. It's difficult to write um, a military scenario or situation without using some of the language or the experiences that just are natural and like it's just the truth. It's just what happens in the military. Um, so how would you look at the like? Since our topic is clean books, I think the Timeless Apostle is a very clear, maybe cut and dried. This is clean. You have a story that's literally has Jesus in the story. Where do you think those previous books fit, and how would you describe them to someone who's interested in the content
Uh,
and kind of rating the content?
I'm glad we're not uh, interviewing on those books because I doubt that they would work with this program. Uh, and I'm actually going to go back and rewrite them and re-edit them and try to clean them up a little more because I
Uh
want
huh.
they are Christian in nature. They would be for a
Yeah.
Christian audience, but some of the language in those books would probably be offensive to some Christian folks, and I think I need to go back and change it. When I first wrote it, I simply couldn't hear my first sergeant saying, "Well, darn it."
Right. Right.
Really awful. You know, he just wouldn't say it that way. And so I wrote it the way I remember him saying it, and that would be a little strong for some folks.
Yeah.
But we have none of that at all in the Timeless Apostle.
Yeah. Well, and I think that you make a good point. Like when you're writing, you're trying to clean up the language. You write it clean, and um, for an audience that's looking for that, it's not always easy to write a character like a first sergeant who everybody knows doesn't use that word. There's no first sergeant or master sergeant or gunny on earth who says "darn it." So how do you write it and still make it sound realistic, and that's challenging.
It just sounded too cheesy to me to write it
Yeah,
clean, and so I avoided using the worst language, but there are some words that just simply certainly wouldn't want to give it to your 12 or 13-year-old son or daughter to read. Whereas the
right.
story would be a great story for anyone to read, but because of the language, it wouldn't work. And so I think I'm going to go back, try my very, very best to clean it up and make it sound acceptable to any audience, especially if the
Yeah,
Timeless
yeah.
Apostle does well.
It,
Um, People are going to want other books that I've written.
right, and you want those people who have that expectation based on the Timeless Apostle to then read your other books and not be surprised.
Correct.
Yeah, for sure. And I did that for one of my books. I actually started with two versions, one that my kids could read and one that was a little more adult. And then I went back and I was like, this doesn't make sense. So I basically converted it to the teen version for everybody. And but there were still a few places where some they're not the strong words, but some more mild swear words where I could not find something that really portrayed the scene as effectively. And maybe one day I go back and look again, but it's it's difficult. So I think it'll be interesting for you when you go back to see how you're able to change that and still feel comfortable that you're staying true to the story and the characters.
One of the chapters that actually is fairly humorous is this chapter where the protagonist from that book meets the angel and responds to the message and gets converted to Christianity, but he still hasn't learned how to control his language. So the angel and he have a number of conflicts over the way he talks, and the process of him changing is fairly interesting and humorous, but that whole part will have to be changed. So,
And you alluded to one of the challenges that we've talked about many times on this program, which is that it's difficult to there's no real format for sharing the content of a book. And so as an author, we don't mean to imply that an author has to write clean or can't write some clean and some that might not be considered clean. But where the challenge comes, and I think you hit it spot on, which is if you chose to do that, to educate your reader base that, hey, this book is one that's going to fall into a clean category that you would really enjoy. These others have a similar storyline but aren't going to be that way. There's no real clear method to educate your readers on what they're going to get. And so to your point, you might hit it might come out of left field and totally surprise them and put some of them off if they didn't know that some of your stories might not be that way. And so that's definitely a gap in the industry that we find that
yeah,
even if an author, if you wanted to write both of those, how do I let my audience know this would fit your a genre and the type that you'd like, and this other one you may want to stay away from, but I still want to write those because
right.
we don't say there's anything wrong necessarily with writing those. It's just difficult to educate. So
It's
Yeah.
unfortunate we don't have a rating system similar to the movie industry that we could uh, to let people know that. When I wrote to publishers, I always added to my letter, my query letter, that there was some rough language in the story and some violent encounters between the dark forces and the good forces. But it still doesn't give you the opportunity to let your reader know that before they purchase a book and then get disappointed.
Yeah. And there's a very big difference between being hit out of left field and being upset by it and knowing in advance and making the choice to read it anyway. Because like I'm not going to sit here, even though I'm running this uh, podcast, I'm not going to sit here and claim that I've not read books that had stuff in them. Like I've enjoyed books that weren't totally clean. It's I get upset when I feel like especially in the marketing effort, there's a bait and switch on me where I think I'm getting something and I get something different. That's where I have a problem. And, I would try to fill my life with things that are edifying and clean, but there are some really good stories that have language in them or scenes. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I don't read them sometimes, but it's the knowing, it's the ability to choose that I think really
Exactly.
matters. Right.
Yep.
I
Exactly.
mean, if I choose to go to a PG-13 movie, I'm choosing to be okay with whatever content is in that movie, or I'll go to a G, or so that's like Brock said, that's just not it's just non-existent really in the publishing world. And I wonder, and tell me what your thoughts are on this, and because you've self-published and traditionally published, like who will be the leader in maybe creating the system or making it happen? Is it going to be the independent author self-publishing who kind of come together and create the system, or is it going to be one of the big publishing houses that decide to create it?
Well, certainly right now, it's got to be the author. And if I were to republish my original two books, I would add an acknowledgement page at the front of the book or some kind of blurb on the back cover that would announce that there is language and violence in the book so that everybody would get a chance to read it. I don't think the publishers are going to do that. If if there was a movement of any kind among authors to make those kind of adjustments, perhaps it would put enough pressure on publishers that they would begin to do that. And that might be an opportunity to get involved in creating some kind of organization that would improve those dynamics.
Yeah, I think you're right. And so it sounds like, Brock, we've got some work to do.
Indeed. Yeah, absolutely. We'll take up that flag and carry that.
For sure.
Yeah, I think that'd be important. Since you've both self-published and traditionally published, are the marketing efforts the same for you, or do you find them a little bit different depending on which way you go?
Well, with a traditional publisher, at least a small one, there is not much that they do in terms of marketing.
Hmm.
Um, they've entered my book into a couple of contests. They've they've done some blogs on with the book, and they've done a lot of social media advertising. But that's about it. Some of the bigger traditional publishers do a bit more, but honestly, in today's market, if the author isn't willing to market his book, he's that's not going to happen any other way. Um, they just
Yeah.
don't do, publishers just don't do a lot of that anymore.
I think that barrier to connect has fallen a lot with social media, that um, people want to be able to see and get to know. Like, one of the things that I've learned as I've studied how to market on social media is that you don't post about your book every single time. Post about yourself and post about your life, post about the things you're doing, because your readers want to get to know you. They don't just want to see an ad for your book every day. And then if they get to know you, they're more willing to buy the book. And so I started thinking about that, and how am I influenced? And I think it's true. There have been times I've purchased things or supported because I liked the person. Like I said, I'll buy this from you because I believe in what you're doing and I want to support you and your family. And it's because I got to know them, not just hit with commercials or ads for the book. So it's a
Exactly right.
very different world than a publisher just sending out posters to bookstores, or even sending you on a book tour type thing.
We just got back. My wife and I just got back from a book fair in near Atlanta, Georgia, and we sold a handful of books, but it was only to the people that we had engaged in some kind of conversation with. The people that came by the booth, looked at the book cover, walked on, and weren't interested. The people that we spent time in conversation about other things than writing, getting to know somebody, every one of them bought a book. So
Yeah.
you're telling it exactly as it is.
Yeah, that's spot on. I've done a couple of those type fairs, and like that's not my comfort zone. Sitting there and saying "Hey" to some stranger walking by and engaging in conversation, but it's effective. It's
Yeah.
and it's one of those things I have to kind of force myself to learn how to do better. And because you meet, and once I do it and I start talking to the person, it's great. It's interesting, but it's that initial. It's
Yes, it
just
is.
that's just not me, and probably the reason why I'm writing books and not
That's right.
doing something out there. You generally don't get extroverts who write novels at home in their basement.
Fortunately, my wife really loves talking with folks, and she did a lot of that initial conversation. Eventually, brought me in, and that's where the relationship began to get going, and it worked
Perfect.
in terms of sales were concerned.
Yeah, that's perfect. It's funny. We'll do it. We've kind of created a community of local authors, so we'll join together in a booth. So we'll have like 4 or 5 authors, and one of the other um, guys there, he's supporting his wife. He read my books and really liked them, so he like talks up my books more than I do, and I'm like, okay, go ahead, you sell the book for me, and then I'll jump in. So that's working as a team. That's a good way to go.
Yep.
So with the third book of your previous season, did you how is that going now that you don't have that collaboration and partnership? Are you finding that difficult to pick up and work on?
Uh, yeah, it's still a little bit difficult, but I've gotten 3 or 4 chapters written since the first of the year. I'm a little stuck on plot right now, but I think this year we'll wrap it up, and then if we decide to rewrite it to make it more palatable for the Christian marketplace, we'll resubmit it to all the publishers that we tried the first time.
Yeah, see if they'll take it up.
Yep.
Yeah, and I'm sure your friend is up there and supporting your efforts and cheering you on.
I hope he gets busy and signs me up with a couple of publishers. That'd be great.
There you go. Maybe he's finding the answers to some of those questions you guys were debating, and
That's one thing I've always said is that when we finally die, all our questions are going to be answered. So he's got all the answers right now, and I'm kind of anxious to get there and talk with him about it.
maybe he'll nudge you in the right direction while you're writing. Because at least me personally, I've felt the presence of friends and family members who have passed on and gone before. I think they're there watching over us for sure. Yeah. All right. Well, we are about out of time here. This has been great. Been really interesting. We wish you the most success and want all our readers go and check out the books. Before we jump into your two truths and a lie and see if we can figure those out, do you have any other clean authors that you would recommend that you'd like to share?
Not that are published yet. I'm a part of an organization here in
Okay.
Winston-Salem, North Carolina, called the Winston-Salem Writers Association. And I know about a half a dozen authors that are right in the middle of their books. Uh, and I will certainly recommend them to you when they're published. So yeah, I've got a
Awesome.
whole list.
Yeah, that would
Yeah,
be
please
great, and
send
we'd love
that
to
to
talk
us
to
when you get
them.
it. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
We'd love to talk to them either after they've been published or even leading up to it, as part of that release marketing effort. So yeah, send them our way for sure. That'd be great. All right, so let's get in. Let's remind everybody of our two truths and a lie. Number one, I once stood within a few feet of a United States president with a loaded 45 caliber handgun. Number two, I had lunch with Mick Jagger and Keith Richards. And number three, the commanding general of the Ghanaian Air Force took me and some friends out for a Coca-Cola in Accra, Ghana. What do you think? Brock, you go first.
All right. Well, I'm fascinated by all of these, but I'm just going to make an initial guess here. So I'm going to say that the lie is having lunch with Mick Jagger and Keith Richards. I'm going to say that based on your history, you've probably and maybe even met them, but maybe not had lunch with. The other two are pretty believable based on things too. So I'm going to leave it there. Marcus, I'll let you go.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, when I was working for the Navy, I was in situations where I was carrying a weapon near an important person. I've gone to SeaWorld with foreign high ups in the military down their protective detail. I think I'm going to once again have to agree with you. Brock, I'm going to have to go with number 2. Maybe you've met them but didn't have lunch with them. So I think number 2 is the lie.
Oh, you guys figured me out easily.
We got it.
We've done this a lot, and so I think we're kind of getting into reading between the lines better than before. But man, those are some pretty intense situations.
Well, I was an honor guard for President Nixon when he visited Germany in, what was that, 72? No, I mean, 70. So, and then my friends and I were walking through some of the poorest areas of Accra, Ghana, looking for something to drink, and this fella pulled up in a white SUV and told us to get in, and he questioned us about it, and we told him we were just out looking for a Coke, and so he drove us about a mile into the city, and of course, every 100 yards, we're getting more scared as we're getting lost.
Yeah,
We find our way back, and he knocked on the door of a shack in the middle of the city, and a guy in his underwear came to the door, and he spoke to him, and he went back in, got us all pops, and we got back in the car, and he delivered us back to our compound. And on the way back, he told us that he was the commanding general of the Air Force.
Whoa. Yeah, I can only imagine how nervous you'd be and how anxious you'd be getting on that ride.
And if we hadn't, I think we would have gone to another location, and he would have forgot about the Coca-Cola and taken us to the detention center.
Yeah, you
appreciated that, and actually, it was a really nice conversation for the evening.
That could have gone
Amazing.
a very different direction. So, oh, very cool. Well, thank you so much for Ken for being on the show with us today. It's been a great conversation. We've really enjoyed getting to know you and getting to know about your books. For everyone out there listening or watching, thank you. Please subscribe, please follow, please share. That's the best way that you can support the show, is by sharing it with your friends on social media, by word of mouth. We appreciate it all. So thank you so much for listening, and we will catch you next time on the Clean Library Podcast.